Let's get started. Thank you all for coming. I know a few more people are on their way, including our Associate Dean, Bill Willoughby. I just want to introduce Chris Maurer, who is a longtime friend of the CUDC. I don't know what all you're talking about today, but he's worked with some very prominent and well-regarded architectural firms, including studioMDA and Mass Design in Africa. He taught our third-year studio a few years back, which was our design-build studio. And so part of the connection that we have is this kind of long-standing relationship with a house on 67th Street, which Chris was really instrumental in helping the students to realize their design ideas in a real project. It's so nice today because we have sort of the team back together. Kristen Sieber, Helen Liggett, and then hopefully Bill will turn up. It's so funny to see you guys together. I wish we had donuts and kind of a masonry saw. We could do something useful. But since finishing the design build house, Chris actually launched his own firm, Redhouse, which is over in Hingetown, and they're doing some really remarkable work. We met a couple of months ago, and I was amazed by the scope of it. So Chris very generously agreed to come and talk with you all today. So I'm just going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you. So like Terry said, we have a small practice in Ohio City called Redhouse. You can tell by our logo we're small and a modest firm. We don't have any flashy stuff going on with that, but the name Redhouse actually came from the design build project that we worked on here with Kent State University. My trajectory came from Northeast Ohio. I spent about 6 years in New York City, but worked on some major projects that took me out of the city, from Anchorage, Alaska to Lilongwe, Malawi, and a lot of places in between. This is kind of the timeline here where I studied here at Kent State University. The major thesis project was a design for the MoCA museum that's now been built, not with our design, unfortunately, but with somebody else's. And then in New York City, there was at studioMDA, I worked for Markus Dochantschi, who was a protégé to Zaha Hadid. He started his firm in New York City in about 2002, I think. And I was there from 2005 to about 2010. We did some projects in New York that were high-end galleries, low-income housing, and some work that actually took us to Africa. That kind of really developed this sense of interest for me to work in the developing world, and so I took a job with Mass Design Group as their director for their Rwanda office, and we did several projects for organizations like Partners in Health and the Clinton Global Initiative and others like that. Came back to Cleveland, started the Developing World Studio at Kent. I talked to Dean Steidel and Associate Dean Willoughby, mentioned my work in Africa, and they thought it would be a good opportunity to have a studio based off of developing world issues. And then from there, we started working on the design rebuild project, and some of my students from the former semester in the developing world took that same studio, so we were calling this the Redeveloping World Studio, and the Redeveloping World House became the Red House, and that's where the name of the organization came from. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the business models of those organizations before I jump into projects. So all of these projects had work in either developing world or in pro bono work, humanitarian or just public interest design. With studioMDA, there was a clear break between what was gallery work or higher income type of work, really capital A architecture stuff. And then the work that we did pro bono was usually based around marketing the firm or networking into celebrity causes. Like you can see Marcus here with Madonna on one of our projects in Malawi, where she was going to build a boarding school similar to the Oprah Winfrey Academy. The top project up here is the Malaika Foundation school for girls that was built for Congolese supermodel Noella Cazares. So there was a real intentionality about some of the projects we picked there, and even though they were done for free and completely pro bono, they were done in a way that kind of augmented publicity, and that was one of the main reasons for doing that. At Mass Design Group, the pro bono or the humanitarian impact kind of work was the mission, so that was the basis for design. But you can see, whereas with studioMDA, there's this clear break between what's high pay and what's pro bono. With Mass Design Group, there's this gradation that happens there, because we would collect fees for all of the projects there. It was kind of important for the model that the people who we were working for understood that there was value in the design, so there had to be some payment, but most of the payment did come from developed world partners that had more money to spend on projects. The ethos here was based off of what Paul Farmer did with Partners in Health. The Partners in Health was our fiscal sponsor. And in the book, Mountains Beyond Mountains, Paul elucidates his concept of the preferential option for the poor that he gets from liberation theology. The idea is that the poor are so commonly marginalized that when we work for them, we should not only give them the efforts that we would for our developed world partners, but even more, because they deserve the respect, and we need to look at ways of innovating with limited resources to making their lives a lot easier. So that brings us to Redhouse Studio. I started Redhouse a few years ago. We're now 4.5 people, 4 full-time and 1 part-time. We do our market rate versus pro bono projects are a little bit on the gradation, but to keep the wheels turning, we do have to do a lot more of the market rate stuff. But in our research, we try to promote technologies that are super sustainable, and even though the projects you see there on the right and some of the ones I'll talk about aren't paying yet, we do have some hope that the research will pay off at the end of the day. So it's a kind of an investment in the future, but for good reasons, I would say, for a better cause. So that kind of leads to the topic of the day, designing with limited resources. Oh, yeah, lean forward. So designing for limited resources. So you guys have probably seen this project. It's a pretty innovative system that was designed for rainwater capture, and what it does is basically pulls water out of the air. The tubes in the form in the middle are designed to capture and condensate water and drop it into a chamber there at the bottom that people can come and collect it. So it's literally pulling water from thin air. And these are the types of designs that are commonly referred to as like reverse innovation, where people innovate because need is the mother of, or necessity is the mother of invention. In these areas where there's much need, much necessity, you can see a lot of innovation, and some of these things can be brought back to developed world markets and used in ways that can limit our utilization of resources, even though it seems like water is endless and we don't need to pay for it. It seems free, but there is a small cost to it, but not nearly as much as what it should be when you consider the world need for water. In the developed world, there's also opportunity for leapfrogging, I guess I would call it, into new technologies where we have infrastructures here in the developed world, like the grid that requires us to use large-scale infrastructure to feed our homes and our businesses. We also have factories that have run off of coal and other fossil fuels for a long time that are in existence, and to not utilize them would be a huge cost. But when those plants don't exist in the developing world, or the grid doesn't exist, then you have a much more, the capacity for jumping past the old technology straight to the new, using renewable resources and ideally off the grid, so you wouldn't have to even waste the energy that goes into the grid. Same thing with sewage and water collection. Those things can, because there is no grid, because there aren't these systems that, here in Cleveland we have these CSOs that dump sewage into the lake during major storm events. If we decentralize that treatment and do it in a biological way, like the living machine you see here, that enables the capacity for not polluting rivers and streams to do things a little bit lower tech, but in a way that's useful and more sustainable. We've seen a lot of biogas projects too in limited resource environments, whether that be rural America or Africa or anywhere really, that are starting to inform the way we produce energy here in the U.S. Quasar is a company in Cleveland or in Ohio that's producing energy from biological waste, basically. Some major numbers to consider: 40% of the world's carbon emissions are from the building industry, and that comes from the U.S. EPA. 534 million tons of construction and demolition waste go to landfills each year in America. That's enough to be 10 pounds per person per day. So every American throwing away 10 pounds of rubble a day. A room like this that has 30 some people in it, that's 300 pounds a day basically. So I guess the point I'm trying to get to is, looking at these limited resource environments and bringing them back to the developed world. I think we need to kind of do that all the time. We need to use that innovation that we aspire to in limited resources environments to environments that we consider to have many resources. So the point here is that all resources are limited. The way that we're building, the way that we're using materials and discarding them is leading to an age of the climate refugee. And in the developed world, that looks like the slide on the left, where people are being displaced because they are not able to reach food resources or just the normal necessities of life. In the developing world, it looks like the picture on the left, where you see people barricading themselves. More and more we see that in the United States. The calls for walls to keep out foreigners, to immigration bans to keep out foreigners, to protect the resources that we have here, whether that be jobs or in Northeast Ohio, in the Great Lakes region, we have 20% of the world's supply of fresh water. Areas that do have lots of resources are positioning themselves to be in this armed life raft position where they have to protect the resources they have. So I mentioned the climate refugee. Currently there are more people displaced by climatic events than there are by political events, and that includes the recent surge coming out of Syria and other countries in the Middle East. As many as one person per second was displaced last year due to climatic events, and by 2050 we're looking at about 200 million people every year being displaced by climatic events caused by climate change. That's enough to be 6 people per second displaced. The building processes that we have today are in no way able to handle that surge of building that would be required to house 200 million people every year. Refugee camps are often held up as an answer. The average stay in a refugee camp is not very short. It's 17 years. In warm climates, they look like the tent camps that you've seen, but in cold climates, that's not a possibility. So a lot of buildings would be required, in that with the carbon footprint involved in masonry and concrete and deforestation due to wood, building with wood, there's just not a way to build for that many people. So one material that I had been looking into and have wrote on, this is a manual that I wrote for designers like yourselves to work with rammed earth or compressed earth blocks, and cited some of the projects that we worked on in Africa. and gave design guidance, soil guidance, testing of materials guidance for people that are interested in designing with it. This is a very low resource material. You basically use the earth right under your feet, and in many cases you can just manually compact that to the state that you need it to build with. I thought this was I enjoyed working with it in non-seismic areas. It's actually a really good product, but too many times we try and build with it. They are in seismic areas, and then you have to reinforce it with concrete. It's very bad seismically. It's not very good thermally as well. So I kind of left that lead and moved on to other things. Got some help from a couple people in the room, actually. Michaela and Forrest, this is their project that they did in third year. They were in one of my studios for Malawi. And they did an elegant design, as you can see here, but one of the more innovative things that I think they came across was the use of a mycological material. And these bricks are made out of basically the waste of mushroom farming. And I'll talk about that process in a little bit, but the project on the left was done by an artist named Philip Ross, who made these bricks out of reishi mushrooms that are growing in them. And they actually harvested the mushrooms during this exhibit that was in the Kunsthal and I think Dusseldorf, and made tea from them for exhibit goers. And not only impressed people with the ability of this mushroom to produce architecture, but kind of boosted the immune system of a whole town in Germany. The project on the right was by David Benjamin for MoMA's PS1 competition, and these are bricks made by a company called Ecovative that basically make bricks from mycelium, which is the root structure of fungus. And this is probably the tallest form of the art that's now referred to as mycotecture. So our studio has been looking at that as a great resource for designing in limited resource environments, and as I mentioned, that includes just about every environment that we design in. The process that it takes to produce these materials is pretty simple. If you were to go all the way from root to block, you would do the process that's signaled there, where you take the root structure of the mushroom body, which is called mycelium. That's the vegetative state, basically, of the organism. So when you think of a mushroom versus mycelium, think of the apple versus a tree. The organism itself is the tree that grows underground, or the branching system that can be much, much bigger than what you see in the fruiting body, which is basically just the reproductive organ of the mycelium. The largest organism in the world is a mycelium mat that's 2,200 acres big, and it's in Oregon. So it can grow pretty much indefinitely without any, if it's given enough food to grow. So you would basically extract that. You can inoculate any kind of organic matter, which you see there, straw. We use sawdust sometimes. We use corn stover, different materials that the mycelium can grow in. And then what you have with the hand there is a bag that's basically filled with that mycelium, and mushrooms start to sprout out the side. So if you're the farmer, you're going to harvest those mushrooms, and you're going to throw away that mycelium. If you're us, you're going to grab that mycelium, you're going to put it into something that you can compact, and then you can make bricks out of that. On the bottom left there is a material that we made, and there's some structural testing there that show that the strongest ones that we've come up with rival hardwood or concrete for their compressive strength. Commercially produced material that use this stuff rival or beat EPS for insulative strength, and they have a fire protection, Class A fire protection similar to gypsum board. So this is pretty much the most multifunctional material that I've ever come across, and I've again worked from Kigali to Anchorage and a lot of places in between. So we immediately tried to find ways to utilize this for the problems we mentioned earlier, the climate refugee. What you see here is a proposal that takes an inflatable form that can be delivered to site, erected immediately for secure and defensible shelter. And then the processes that go into creating the micro-textural shell not only produce a lasting shelter, but also augment food security and water security in their resource loops. So you can see the diagram to the right where you have to produce agriculture. You take the agricultural waste, you feed that to the mycelium, and then you get everything you produce either goes to plates, well, it goes to plates, to market, and to another resource loop, so it can continue on. So I showed that to somebody at NASA, talking about the material, and showed her some samples that we made. And she said she often designs in limited resource environments as well. And she's an astrobiologist that has been doing a lot of work for the Mars missions based around cyanobacteria, which is a type of blue-green algae that produces oxygen and can be used to produce energy as well. We're looking at, we're working on a project right now where we're going to pair that cyanobacteria with mycelium and basically make this shelter in a bag idea that you can go into space with very little resources on the shuttle, and then when you get to Mars you can unpack that into thousands of pounds of building material. It costs about $10,000 to put 1 pound of material in orbit, and Mars is much, much farther than going into orbit, so we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a pound up there. So if you can go into space with a couple of petri dishes and make thousands of pounds of material when you get there, you're going to save NASA a lot of money. As I mentioned, it can also produce power. The cyanobacteria can produce oxygen, which is good for breathing. It can also produce hydrogen, and if you have hydrogen and oxygen, you can power fuel cells. And the waste material from that actually is water, so that goes back into the waste resource loop. Cyanobacteria could be grown as spirulina, which is the very good food resource, and so are the dried mushrooms. So you got food, power, oxygen, and shelter all in one equation. And you can kind of see the steps that are going there, that basically this thing, all it needs is CO2 and water to inflate itself, so that there could be many of these buildings built before astronauts arrive if rovers are able to utilize the water and the CO2 that are on the planet. Here's one that we are looking at for Northeast Ohio. As I mentioned earlier, 534 million tons of waste, construction waste, go to landfills every year. There's about 15,000 homes in Cuyahoga County that are vacant. 5 to 8,000 homes are slated for, or approved for demolition, or are vacant. About 1,500 each year are approved for demolition. The home recycler basically can take that waste material, throw that into a grinder. So we could take the 2x4s, plywood, gypsum board, plaster, any kind of organic material that comes out of the construction, throw it into a chipper, inoculate that material with mycelium, grow it for a small time until we can put it into one of these presses and make new building materials. And we could, build blocks, we could build walls, we could build arches, we can build all kinds of things out of this waste material. And we're looking at a project coming up that's basically going to have a demolished house on one side of our container, and then a sculptural house on the other side made out of this material. So kind of highlighting the processes and talking about some of these issues, like the millions of tons of waste that go to landfills each year that could be used in other ways. In researching this, we also found a lot of the bioremediation qualities in fungi. So a lot of bioremediators now are basically looking at petrochemicals and even some biological toxins. But when you add bacteria and fungi to the equation, you can actually capture, sequester things like heavy metals like lead, or valuable materials like copper or potassium. It can even neutralize or bioaccumulate and safely sequester things like radiation. A major issue here in Northeast Ohio is lead. So that's one of the projects we're trying to promote. This is a remediation garden that we're doing for a gym in Midtown, but we're actually going to use it as a testing facility for other toxins that we can introduce into controlled areas to show the efficacy of this. We'll have like a real-time placard that shows water quality that's been run through the chamber versus a control. And like I said, we can add toxin, like lead debris into certain areas under control and show how we can accumulate that and extract that, bring that back out, and safely dispose of it. So I mentioned the process of actually extracting valuable materials. This is a NASA photo of Lake Erie, and you can see it's during one of the major algal blooms. Lake Erie is the worst of the 5 lakes for this phenomenon because it's shallow, and we have a lot of runoff that goes into the lakes. So most of it is caused by phosphate fertilizers or different kinds of fertilizers that go in there. There's also an issue with our combined sewer overflows that put raw sewage into the lake. It contains a lot of phosphorus that the algae eat. I don't know how much you guys know about this phenomenon, but it actually has been poisoning people over the last few years. In Toledo, there was a major problem with the drinking water. In Lake Michigan and other places, it's led to botulism in the wildlife. It really chokes the wildlife, including fish and birds in all of the Great Lakes regions. So this is a huge blight. It's a huge problem for our ecologies, but it's being experimented and tested with now, but it's not. We're not finding ways to stop it. So one way to look at that is maybe we could see the benefit of that material, and if it becomes a resource for us, then maybe its extraction or capture could be feasible in different avenues. So what we're proposing down here along the bottom is that the water that goes into the lake can either be captured in constructed wetlands, like you see in the top middle picture, or harvested by barges and scoops to collect some of the material, bring it to shore. And then our friend there, that Caprinus comatas, is also called the shaggy mane, and it has the natural ability to bioaccumulate phosphates. It's not the only fungus that does it, but it's the only legal fungus that I know that can do it. A lot of the psychedelics are pretty good at absorbing phosphates too. But this one we could probably get a little bit more political will behind. And it has the actual benefit that it bioaccumulates the material, and it disintegrates shortly after it fruits. So this thing can disintegrate into a liquid that we would then put into a slurry, and if you ran electrolysis through this, you could pull the ionized phosphates out rather easily, and you'd have like a large concentration of these phosphates that could then be recycled. This is done now with copper ions, copper chemicals, with a plant called duckweed. And the duckweed bioaccumulates it. They burn the duckweed. The ash is put into a slurry, and then they use this electrolysis to concentrate the ore. So you could, in a ground where you would not know there's any copper at all, you could actually bioaccumulate enough to have a good concentration of copper. So same thing with phosphorus. Now phosphorus is cheap. Why would I suggest that would be the huge resource and not the blight or the botulism or anything else? Phosphorus is actually in decline. It's a non-renewable resource. About 90% of the supply of it are in 2 countries, Morocco and neighboring West Sahara. We'll soon be seeing the age of peak phosphorus. You've all heard of peak oil, but there's a similar phenomenon with phosphorus that maybe by the 2030s it will be so expensive that it won't be economically feasible to fertilize with it anymore. And if biofuels take off and we need more and more fertilizer, Some scientists project that we may exhaust all resources within 50 to 100 years. Phosphorus is needed by all plants. It's what plants crave, if you've ever heard that expression. Yeah, we are living in that movie now. But there is an actual substance that plants crave, and it's phosphorus are among them. The reason that we've kind of come to this point is because of monoculture. There used to be a symbiosis between fungi and plants, where and there is in old growth forests and other areas where mycorrhizal fungi attach itself to the roots of plants and extract nutrients from the soil and give it to the plant in exchange for sugars that the plant produces using photosynthesis. With monoculture and tilling the soil and creating situations where the plants aren't able to pair with their mycobiome, as they're called, they now need fertilizer to grow just about anything. And like I said, it's all concentrated in one area of the earth that we can get to easily. We're running out of that resource. So by producing a way to recycle that material and ideally limit that material using mycorrhizal fungi is one example that's been proposed, we may prolong this peak phosphorus phenomenon. We may be able to actually stockpile here in Northeast Ohio major amounts of phosphorus if we were to pursue a plan like this to recycle it and create a reserve, if you will, for phosphorus. But that's the last project I have, actually. Happy to talk about any of those a little more if you have some questions, but I just wanted to kind of get through some of these things and then talk about the trajectory, which is really, for me, I kind of learned a lot from working in the developing world to limit resources, to innovate in new ways, and I think that's really helped me to think differently when I came back to Northeast Ohio, and to see problems like these with fresh eyes and look for low-tech solutions for problems that are very huge and systemic and things that you don't usually come across in the bush of Alaska or the bush of Africa. So it's kind of given me new eyes to look at these things, and I think has led to some of the research that we're doing, now with NASA and with Ohio State and other partners that we're working with to get some of these projects along. So that's us in a nutshell. We also do architecture as well. We're designing a hotel on West 25th now. We're doing some landscape and some architecture in the flats, and projects from Austin to Chicago right now.